What is going on, people? My name's Eric, and would you look at what finally washed up on the shores of Australia? That's right, Caravan Palace's new album, Chronologic. I mean, I'm calling it new, but it technically came out a month ago. I've been dying to review this thing ever since it came out, but I really wanted to wait till a physical vinyl copy came. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a lot to say about the music, but this thing alone is already pretty deluxe and I think worth looking at. So let's take a gander, shall we? So as you can see for this album, they've gone with a really cool high quality render of their signature robot, sort of in a carved sculpture, I suppose. They've really used this across a lot of their marketing for this album. Even on the back here, you can see a lot of the faded carvings and all this really high quality detail. Clearly someone is a really talented renderer. And as we pull it out, you can also see a close-up of the robot's face right there. Whilst on the back, we have the lyrics to the songs, which, mind you, is quite a helpful thing to have for this album, as I find a lot of the vocals can be muffled at some times, so it is actually kind of cool to see what they're singing about. And then last but not least, I did get the deluxe version of this vinyl, which means that it's white. Yes. Now, this might just be the most hipster thing I've ever done, because I will confess I actually don't have a record player. So, you know, it's kind of just one of those things where it's like, this felt really special to me. I kind of wanted to put this up in my room somewhere, and it just looks nice. It's a special thing to have. I'll probably get a record player eventually, and when I do, this will be a nice little memento that I can share with my future kids or whatever. Vinyls are still probably the highest quality form of physical music. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Anyway, that's the vinyl. Took like a month to get here almost, but it was totally worth it. Nice to sit up on my bedside drawers now. So yeah, let's talk about the music though now. So I suppose to discuss this album, it's probably best I start talking a little bit about the history of Caravan Palace and sort of what's brought them up to this point of this album. So originally Caravan Palace, their first album was released in 2008, and that was sort of a fairly jazz-oriented album. What you might know them as now is a lot more kind of mixing electronic elements with jazz, the kind of, you know, pioneers of electro swing even. Back then it was a lot more like jazz heavy. There wasn't as much like electronic influence in their music. Like they had a few songs here and there though that kind of experimented a little bit with that. Notably Jolly Cocaine, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. That song especially was a bit of a hit off that album, and I suppose since they realized that, they tried implementing the electronic elements a little bit more into their future albums, which is why their following album, Panic, really introduced a lot more electronic production into their tracks. And really cemented them, I suppose, as electro swing legends. At this point, they were really establishing their niche audience. I think this is a crucial time for the band's identity. But I think by the time the third album came along, they were really trying to, you know, broaden their horizons and get some more listeners in. Their last album came out in 2015. It was called Robot Face. And I suppose the music on that one was a little bit more digestible for maybe the average person. It really shows, actually, some of their most popular music is from that album. And if I'm to be completely honest, up until this point, that's probably been my favorite album of theirs so far. You know, I'll tell you if that's changed or not soon. That one had all the hits like Lone Digger, Wonderland, Aftermath, Mighty, Comics, you know. Really great album, and honestly, if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend giving that one a listen, maybe even before you check out this one. But with Chronologic, they're really trying to take that mainstream approach even further, I think, as not only a lot of these songs quite accessible, they also kind of carry a little bit, well, quite a lot more of a pop formula, say, than, you know, any of their last few albums. Probably got a bit of a taste of that when Miracle came out early this year, and then even a bit more with About You. And that's pretty much the identity that the majority of this album is taking. It's mostly kind of pop-oriented with a little bit of sprinkling of some of their older influences. That being said, they have definitely kept their signature sonic sound in this kind of new pop formula, and I think even fans of those older tracks will still find something to love here because of that. Now, when I'm talking about this album, I think there's probably two ways to look at it, right? You can look at it as a standalone album and compare it to, you know, just any other kind of pop music, or EDM pop, or whatever you want to categorize them into. And then there's the other way you can look at it, which is comparing it to their past works. And I think it's really important to mention that, because what I'm going to do is kind of do a bit of both. And so, you know, when I say something's not that great, it might just be relatively speaking, you know, comparing it to their own stuff. But then on the other token, you know, if I say it's really great, I might just be comparing it to pop, and maybe compared to some of their own stuff, it's not as like really great. So with that in mind, let's start with my positive thoughts on this album. Okay, so first of all, this is a phenomenal album compared to like any other pop music out there at the moment. This really stands out. It's so unique. The production in this, you have never heard anything like it before, besides maybe like some electro swing artists who are probably just inspired by Caravan Palace. But even then, like Caravan Palace, they still somehow seem to be able to maintain their own little niche within that genre of electro swing. And even with electro swing, I don't even know if I'd go as far as calling this an entirely electro swing album anymore. There's a lot more kind of broader influences, goes into some blues influences, I don't know, a lot of other stuff. Obviously, Caravan Palace have also been quite well known for having a little bit of gypsy jazz influence as well. And there's a bit of that in here. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that even though they are pursuing this kind of more relatively formulaic pop sound compared to, what they've done before, they're not sacrificing their sound. They really are trying to be unique in this new pursuit. Yes, it's pop, but it's still a very artistic album, really imaginative, really inventive, and yeah, just nothing you have heard before. I would even say I'd probably never listened to an album this much on repeat since like Zed's 2015 album True Colors. And I listened to a lot of music, like a lot of music. For me, I don't think I've ever really spoken at length too much about this like on YouTube, but I do find with a lot of modern pop music, there seems to be a bit of a death of melody, death of emotion to some extent. I feel like everything's kind of got to fit in this really tight niche box, and it's kind of cheesy to break out of that or try something too ambitious, because then you might just come across as a try hard, and it's like, oh no, just fit into this little thing everyone wants. Okay, now this album does not do that at all. It's not like a sellout album. If you worry that Caravan Palace is like selling out trying pop, you needn't be afraid at all. This is absolutely not that. Yes, it's more poppy, but there is a lot of inventive stuff here that you just won't find anywhere else. Hopefully I've drilled that point home enough. Especially if you've never listened to Caravan Palace before, or even like electro swing, you'll listen to this and probably be blown away at just how different it is. And yet, how catchy it is and how memorable these tracks are. There's something that I would even say is great about this album compared to some of Caravan Palace's other albums. Every song on this album I remember distinctly. Like, I don't think I can say that about any of their other albums. Like, even Robot Face, which, again, up to this point is probably my favorite, there would be songs on that album I still don't remember after listening to it like umpteen times. I remember it when I hear it, but am I going to be whistling it? Probably not. Even though some of the less memorable songs on those albums might have really good production, if I'm not going to remember it, then it hasn't captured my emotions. And really, I think at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for with music. And that is really something I got a lot out of with this album. Maybe you could just put that down to the fact that these are kind of pop songs, and so therefore it's going to be easy to remember the production, and, structure's not as complex and it's easier to digest. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, now I know in all my other album reviews, I tend to go track by track and talk about each one in depth. I don't know if I'm going to do that here, but I did want to talk about some of the tracks here that were highlights for me, and some of the ones that weren't, and why that is. Now, I think it is safe to say, like a lot of other albums, unfortunately, there is a case here where the best tracks have already been released as singles. Miracle, About You, Plume, and Supersonics. They're all pretty much some of the best tracks on this album. I think my favourite's got to be either About You or Miracle, which were like the first two singles to be released earlier this year. That's not to say there isn't some nice surprises along the way as well. I know Moonshine has been building up some steam lately as probably the most popular non-single track off this album. One of my personal favourites even is the final track on this album, April, which I actually think is comparable to some of the singles that were released. It's probably like my third favourite track on the album at least. Really nice contrast in that song in dynamics to go from, really dramatic finale music in the form of brass down to this kind of soft folk music even. Also another non-single track that's really growing on me is Water Guns, and I know that upon release, I think still this is possibly one of the least popular tracks on this album. Honestly, I really like that song. I know, like, production-wise, it's, it's not like Caravan Palace's most complex sound design, because it really gives way a lot more to the vocals instead of relying on the sound production. But, it was such a laid-back song and kind of just really made me chill out. I definitely say that's a recurring theme on this album. A lot of these songs, they have a vibe that just kind of makes you want to relax or kind of kick back. It's like, I know in some of Caravan Palace's older work, some of the songs were a little bit dreamy, and they kind of kept that. They've, you know, even in this new pop format, they've brought that dreaminess in. And in fact, one of the best ways I think they have done that is now through the use of lyrics, which is one thing that I would say all of their older albums were, you know, predominantly lacking. Lead vocalist of Caravan Palace, Zoe Colotis, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. She really gets her time to shine. You've probably heard her voice a lot in some of the other albums, but in a lot of those albums, the voice is kind of a bit distorted, not as audible, the lyrics aren't as pronounced, it's kind of often just a hook. And in addition to her, we also have several featured artists, Charles X and Tom Bailey being the credited ones here. And now, say what you want about pop music, and I get it, it can be quite formulaic a lot of the time, but one great thing about it is that it introduces a lot more importance on vocals. And because of that, you'll notice with this album, is like another dimension that's kind of been added to Caravan Palace's repertoire, and that's the addition of kind of profound lyrics. Now, I know I said this a few months ago or so about Avicii's album, you know, the lyrics being the strongest point of that, but you know what, here I think, again, the lyrics are probably some of the strongest points of this album. It's like Caravan Palace have infused their character into the lyrics of this album, and it just adds another dimension to their music where it's like, it feels familiar, it feels very Caravan Palace, but it's in a way you haven't heard it before. And I think the way they achieve that is in the most French way possible, and that is through being very poetic. I was reading the lyrics on the back of this the other day, and I noticed a lot of the lyrics, they kind of read a lot more like poetry than your average pop song would, to be honest. A lot of it's a little bit cryptic, but quite beautiful and metaphoric, even a little bit picturesque. Like just reading some of the lyrics from April, for example. Wild spring, raging in my street. April, please, lower your gun. Cold wind, nude branches on the trees. April, please, help me to run. Running in the nature, away from the past. Pretty as a picture, I'm cheering up so fast. Grey steam, waving on my street. April, please, lower your gun. Blurred dreams, playing on repeat. April, please, help me to run. Running into nature, away from the past, pretty as a picture, I'm cheering up so fast. A child swing, hanging from my tree. My dear friend, you've been the one. Large fields, unexplored, lovely things. April, please, help me to run. Like, what does that mean? I don't know, but it's like kind of cool poetry, you know? I don't know, she's probably singing about the season in April, I assume. But man, you hear like nice poetic lyrics like that over the top of this nice little folk song, also mixed with this kind of dramatic finale music. It's like, man, I feel like nostalgic for the 40s, even though I wasn't alive then. Okay, so I've said a lot of good stuff about this album, now let's get into the crap. Okay, so I think whether you like this album or whether you love this album, I'm not gonna say dislike, because I don't think there'd be many people in that camp, but whether you like or love it will probably be mostly dependent on how much you like pop music. Now, if you're one of those people who's just like really sacred about, you know, Caravan Palace only making a very specific sound that you like and not straying away from that, there's some things on this album that might disappoint you a little bit. I'm gonna say it. Some of the production on tracks, particularly Moonshine, Melancholia, maybe even a little bit on Water Guns, it's not gonna be as rich and layered as probably what you're used to from a lot of Caravan Palace's older music. Sort of what I was alluding to before about how production gives way to the vocals more on this album. There are a lot of songs where that's true, where the vocals are the main event, the production is a supporting factor. That being said, there are some tracks on here that do take that pop approach, but also kind of keep that complex production going at the same time and kind of strike a nice balance, notably Miracle and About You. Even April, as I mentioned earlier, I love that track. But yeah, I do think if you're really expecting some cutting edge production from Caravan Palace, stuff that you've really never heard before, like a step up from what they've done before, you might be a little bit disappointed because that's sort of not really what they're going for here. They're not trying to reinvent you know, their sound design per se. They're not trying to like one-up themselves as far as, you know, how impressive their production abilities are. It's more just about, you know, transforming, evolving what they already have, putting it into a new context. That's kind of the main new element that we've got going here. With that being said, there are some tracks on this album that are a little bit more reminiscent of some of their older tracks. Stuff that isn't so pop formulaic. We got Lena here, which is kind of a little bit of a, I don't know if I'd say future bass, but certainly a bit of trap influence going on there. Mixing it with their signature jazz electro swing style, which is certainly unique and very welcome, but also kind of a little bit more reminiscent of some of their older, more electronic focused tracks. Also Plume, that's a real classic, might remind you a little bit of Russian from their previous album. And Supersonics, which is actually quite different to some of the stuff they've done before, but once again, a little bit more electronic focused, so if that's what you're into, you know, you might find something to like there. And then in between all these tracks, we have like a couple of interlude tracks, which are just purely instrumental, but a nice, you know, way to break things up a little bit. I would say maybe this might be one of my bigger criticisms. The electronic tracks, the like non-pop focused tracks, I find probably like aren't as impressive as some as the like electronic tracks you find in Caravan Palace's previous albums. They're just like, they're fine, they're good, but they don't really measure up. They're not the highlights of this album. And I suppose that's because really the focuses of this album are these big pop tracks, and really they are the best tracks on this album, regardless really of whether you prefer pop or electronic side of Caravan Palace. With that in mind though, what I would definitely recommend not to do is to, you know, listen to all of the albums back to back with some comparative mindset, trying to compare this album to their previous ones. Because, you know, if you listen to all of the previous ones and then you listen to this one, it'll sort of strike you as quite different. You might be getting used to that sort of sound and really, you know, settling in with it and really enjoying that kind of old sound they used to have. And then you'll hear this one and it'll suddenly, you know, really stand out as, you know, quite different and might catch you off guard. I think it's really best to judge this album on its own merit, maybe compare it even to like other pop music. And really, at the end of the day, compared to most pop music, it's really a lot better than a lot of what's out there at the moment. Not to sound pretentious or anything, but you'd be hard-pressed to find production that's much more inventive or unique or creative than Caravan Palace. They are French, so, you know. But to answer the pressing question, is this their best album? No, I'm not going to say it's their best album, but it is absolutely worth a listen. It is a great album. Despite my favorite still being Robot Face, this album is, you know, it's different. It stands on its own. It is absolutely worthwhile existing. There is absolutely a reason for this to exist. It is not a this didn't need to happen album. It's unique, it's different, it works. We need a lot more of that in this industry, so go support it. I love it. It's my favorite album this year by a mile. So yeah, that is Caravan Palace's Chronologic. If you like Caravan Palace, do check out my YouTube channel, as I've got several piano tutorials up there of a lot of the songs from this album, including Miracle, About You, Melancholia, and Plume. Plus, at the moment, I'm also working on a tutorial for April, which will be up very soon. It might already be up if you're watching this a bit later. And let me know down in the comments what you thought of this album, and if you want to see me do a tutorial of a Caravan Palace song, you know, I'm definitely open to suggestions. This is probably my favorite band at the moment, to be honest. But until next time, I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you around. Ciao!